Raspberry ASMR. Since we're already on a superhero theme, I found this one on my bookshelf. It is a novelization of the 2015 Batman Arkham Knight video game. I have never played this game, but I enjoyed this book when I first read it many years ago. So we'll hop right into the summary. A new night. Gotham City is in chaos as the criminal organizations seek to fill the void left by the death of the Joker. When Scarecrow threatens to unleash a toxin that will kill thousands, the result is uncontrollable panic. Batman sets out to stop the madman. Then a new figure intervenes, the Arkham Knight, and he seems to know everything there is to know about Batman and his allies. Alright, you guys ready? We're gonna dive right in. And this is by Marv Wolfman. I don't know if I said that. This is not the story that was leaked to the press. This is how it happened. This is how the Batman died. I'm sure this probably hurt somebody else, so I'm so sorry. Prologue. 9 months earlier. He watched the attendants hoist the body onto the metal mesh, and it landed with what would have been a painful thump had the bastard been alive. But unfortunately he wasn't. Still, that carcass of meat and madness deserved any shame they could give it. They looked up to James Gordon, Gotham City's police commissioner, watching from the second-level balcony. He shook his head ruefully as if to say, "We're not him. Let's get it over with." With a grimace, they shoved the corpse's arms to its side and straightened its legs and stepped back, checking with Gordon again. "We're done," a cop said. "He's done. Anytime you're ready, sir." Gordon nodded and pressed the small red button. He had expected to feel more, perhaps anger, definitely the urge for revenge, but he didn't. Burning up what he once had been a human being, if only in the loosest terms possible, was as simple as press and wait. The end of a life, good or bad, should be more dramatic, or at least sad, but not in this case. Hundreds of blue grass flames suddenly burst into life around the remains. Steadily the cage recorded their heat, rising to a scorching 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal cremation rules demanded that the body be placed in a container or a casket, but the governor had waived the rules for this removal. Everyone wanted to watch this body burn right down to its ashes. Everyone wanted to make certain there was no chance he would rise again. Even dead, he scared the shit out of them. Gordon stood by the red button for nearly 2 hours as the body was slowly, excruciatingly reduced to its component parts by heat and vaporization. He would wait there until he was certain it was done and that Gotham City's seemingly endless nightmare would end once and for all. Finally, all that remained of the body was dust, and that was humiliatingly flushed down a dozen different toilets to further make certain that its various parts would never be able to reconstitute. Was it outside of the prescribed law? Possibly. Gordon mused. Primitive, to be certain. Vindictive, you bet. But this corpse deserved nothing better. He waited until the final flush swirled the last of the ashes on their journey into the ocean, and gave a faint smile to the other observers. They responded in kind, although there was no joy. This was pure relief. He left knowing that at long last, the Joker, that self-proclaimed clown prince of crime, was well and truly gone. Gordon watched as the attendants slapped each other's backs while grinning and laughing. The Joker was gone and would never return. And if that long pent-up relief wasn't reason enough to raise a glass, nothing ever would be. They asked him to join their celebratory dinner, but Gordon turned them down, preferring to be alone. It was true that Gotham City would never have to deal with the grinning madman again, but Gordon never wanted anyone, especially as fellow cops, to celebrate death, not even the Joker's. The end of any life, he thought, should be a solemn event, not an excuse for a party. But as he watched his fellow officers treat the moment as if it was New Year's Eve, it appeared to him that civilization hadn't progressed all that much in the last 10,000 years. Here in Gotham City, it had probably regressed. The commissioner's office at the Gotham City Police Department was as sparsely decorated as Gordon could manage. On his desk were 3 framed pictures of his daughter, Barbara, 2 of her alone, and one she had taken with him, and one with his son, James Jr., taken long ago, in better days. On the wall hung the mandatory professional certificates and a few photos of him receiving awards of some sort from one mayor after the other, but little else. Generic Gotham City lithographs circa the 1930s era had been hung on the walls by his predecessor. He'd have taken them down, but that would have left bluntly discolored gaps where they had been hanging, so he didn't bother. The rug there bred for several decades had been laid down by his predecessor's predecessor's predecessor. When Gordon took the job, he believed that making the office his own would lead to him spending his entire life 24/7 in this 20 by 26-foot prison. On the other hand, if it was Spartan to the point of discomfort, he thought he'd have more reason to go home at night to his wife and family and try to maintain the illusion of a life. Good plan, but lousy results. Except for his daughter, his family had long ago scattered to the winds. So much for a life. He collapsed into his chair, a new and extremely comfortable ergonomic model in his only extravagance, which he paid for himself to help support his bad back. He swung around to stare out at a grime-smeared window overlooking the Gotham City skyline. Staring at its beauty from so high up and through the nearly opaque glass, he could fool himself into thinking there might have been a time when Gotham City had offered hope and not despair. If it ever existed, these days ended with the murders of the Wayne city's greatest benefactors, Thomas and Martha Wayne. The bandage had been pulled loose, revealing the festering wound that lay beneath. Even Bruce, their son, had been unable to heal it. Reluctantly, Gordon accepted that the Joker was dead, and that his particular brand of homicidal mania had ended. But he knew there were dozens of other psychopathic wannabes salivating to claim his throne. Even before the body had been officially identified, the Riddler began shouting from the rooftops that Gotham City was his. "Riddle me this," he bellowed into his amphitheater, who was as insane as the Joker, but still breathing. Someone had been stupid enough to reply, "You are," and he put a bullet through the poor sap's head. "No, you idiots," he shouted to the heavens. "It's the pact that he won't be breathing for long." The Riddler might have been a showman, but Oswald Cobblepot, better known as the Penguin, preferred a more surreptitious approach to accumulating power. He quietly organized Gotham City's criminal gangs, choosing to stay under the radar and rule the streets one crumbling corner at a time. If Gotham City's shadowed alleyways belonged to the Penguin, however, its underground was the domain of Killer Croc, an apotastic freak of nature who was more resembled a thickly scaled reptilian than a man. Gotham City sewers extended in all directions, undermining nearly every square foot of the city, providing unrestricted access to any place Croc wanted to go. As long as he had that sort of access, no one was safe. The list went on and on. There was going to be a gang war. Gordon knew it with certainty. With the Joker dead and a vacuum to be filled, there was no way around it. Any day now, mob leader Carmine Falcone would decide it was time to take on Harvey Dent, the former district attorney now known as Two-Face. Or gang boss Sal Maroni might decide if he waited any longer, Rupert Thorne would try to move into his territory. So Maroni would strike first and hard, and there'd be blood. Hush, Bane, Poison Ivy, and Scarecrows. The ventriloquist, Mr. Freeze, Hugo Strange, and of course Catwoman, deciding on which side of the law she favored on any given day. They all saw Gotham City as a promised land where crime reigned eternal and its advocates ruled supreme. The war was coming. Somewhere on the loose cannons was going to fire the first round, and the police, already woefully undermanned, would crumple in the onslaught. Months, days, hours. It was only a matter of time. The war never came. There were skirmishes, some more significant than others, yet for 9 months the city experienced relative peace. Nevertheless, Gordon never allowed himself to exhale. This was, after all, Gotham City, and as far as he was concerned, she was genetically incapable of sustaining hope. Chapter 1. Maggie placed Tuesday's meatloaf special on the counter in front of Scott Owens. 6 months a proud officer in the Gotham City Police Department, then poured his second cup of coffee. Because she knew he was on a diet, she had already replaced his potatoes with mixed vegetables, and the cornbread with a side salad, light ranch dressing in a small cup to the side. He'd lost 50 pounds, and she was determined to help him lose the last 10 any way she could. Owens barely paid attention to the food, working each bite out of routine and not hunger. Donna was going to have to quit her job to have the baby, so he was trying to figure out if he could support the 3 of them on his rookie salary. Half of their income would be disappearing in 4 short months, even as their expenses increased exponentially. Lost in thought, he didn't feel fingers tapping at his shoulder when they became insistent, and a frightened voice drew his attention. "Officer? Officer?" The words became louder, more strident with each repeat. The man tapping him was in his 30s, dressed casually and looking very worried as he pointed to the far end of the diner. "Do you see it? Do you see them?" The person sitting there had his face turned away, buried in a newspaper, and his attitude was strange enough that Owens decided to check it out. The young officer walked over, stepped in front of the man, and recoiled with instinctive shock. He wasn't looking at a man. If it was a male, he wasn't even human. Owen stumbled back. What he was looking at was some sort of impossible nightmare. He turned to scan the rest of the diners. What the hell? And suddenly realized there were no longer any human customers, but other things moving, some even slithering, as if nothing unusual had occurred. He rubbed his eyes, certain it couldn't be real. Yet when he looked again, the shapes were in front of him. One by one, they turned to stare at another, as if noticing and finally comprehending what had taken them over. Polly's Diner, established in the mid-1950s by a former city mayor, loved the locals as much for its amply positioned homestyle dinners as its low prices, which filled with monsters. And as one of the monsters screamed, "Dispatch Scott Owens, badge number 47532. I need immediate backup. Polly's Diner, 13th and Mulda." Pause. "Now I can't explain why you have to believe me. For God's sake, please hurry." Officer Owens reached for his weapon, but his hand had been replaced with the lobster claws which couldn't hold the gun. The shapes rushed back and forth in chaos, their arms, sometimes like tentacles, flailed, mindlessly lashing out at anyone, anything that came close. And the screams grew louder. Then the shapes were over him, screaming at him. He tried to tell them he was a policeman, but his own words sounded even to him like the growling of a wild dog. Fists and tentacles slammed into him. He felt his face being cut, warm blood spurting from the wounds. The monsters began piling on top of him, first one, then more, fists hitting him, sharp teeth. No, they were fangs, biting into him even as he bit back, sinking his own teeth into the arms of whatever was holding him down. Owens could never remember being so afraid. Every time one of the things moved, no matter how slightly his heart raced, his chest pounded. His skin was covered by a slick sheen of sweat. In his college days, he had climbed mountains. He fell once, and his injuries kept him in the hospital for almost 4 months. But even as he fell, he hadn't felt this kind of dread. It was pervasive, and it controlled him, and he prayed for death rather than suffer it for even a moment longer. He twisted, and like slime, he seemed to flow through the gaps between the other beasts. His claws became flippers, and he used them to push ahead. And the diner door was only a feet away, but it might as well have been on the other side of the planet. There were monsters blocking every escape route. He struggled through the mob and realized these creatures were as confused and terrified as he. They weren't trying to kill him, they were trying to escape, to protect themselves from harm. Suddenly the front door seemed to explode. Monsters pounded at it, shattering its glass. Then pulling their way over the shards and other creatures, they escaped from what had to have been hell. Owens was carried along with the others and found himself outside on the street. His flippers were forming into fingers attached to hands, part of a body that was, thank God, human again. He fell face down in the gutter. Looking up, he saw a dozen men and women running from the diner as if they were still being chased. A few lay on the sidewalk or even the street. Some of them looked pretty bad, but there were no other monsters. Somehow, the threat that came out of nowhere was gone, yet the fear was still there. Evans reached for his phone and tried to call his precinct dispatcher, but he was unable to control his voice. His words still sounded like the howling of a wild animal, and even if he could speak, he couldn't imagine that they would believe him when he said that he had barely escaped with his life from a diner filled with demons. His hands trembled and he dropped the phone. He tried to pick it up again, but it suddenly vibrated. Startled, he dropped it yet again. One of the fleeting customers stepped on the phone, crushing it. Owens felt utterly alone, and the fear spiked. Like the others, he wanted to run away and began to pick himself up, but his legs collapsed under him, and he was unable to move. He lay there, waiting for death, but he didn't die. What he had seen could not have been real, no matter how true it felt. Was it a hallucination? Mass hysteria? If so, did everyone see the same monsters? How is that even possible? Across the street from him stood the Gotham Triangle building, home of the Gotham Tribune, a newspaper that in its heyday had boasted a daily readership of 3 million, but in the internet age barely sold a third of that. Raised high on the front of the building was a gigantic projection screen, which had scrolled the news in a small banner that ran along its base, while commercials filled the rest of the screen. On the giant screen, there were images of beautiful women in just about legal-sized bikinis running along a beach, while some feminine product unknown to Owens was being hawked. Suddenly, the woman pixelated into the static and disappeared, replaced by an interior shot of the diner. For several minutes, Owens stared at the images. The restaurant patrons were running wild, striking out and mindlessly biting each other. Then he saw himself slithering across the tiled floor, grabbing the others and viciously pushing them aside as he pulled himself out to the door in a desperate attempt to escape. He stared at his own image, huge on the screen, not the monster he thought he'd become, but violent and mindless, and he was sick at what he had done. But then he thought of something else, something so frightening it made his stomach churn and his skin turn cold. During all the madness, someone was filming the scene and he never even saw it. What the hell kind of cop was he? As he stared at the screen, it began to flicker again. His image was replaced by a face covered in a brown hessian sack that appeared to be stitched to the wearer's face. Dark, hollowed eyes burned with fire, and he gestured with hands at syringes where fingers should have been. Was this another hallucination? Words scrolled across the screen where the news had been moments earlier. It is time to obey. The bony fingers spoke in a deep, raspy, guttural voice that barely sounded human. Gotham City, I am taking over all your television channels. So look at what I have done, he said. This demonstration used only 5 ounces of my latest toxin. However, this will seem like child's play. Owen read the crawl again and stared at the images, recognizing him from one of the daily briefings. This was a criminal known as Scarecrow. Gotham City, this is your only warning. That hideous face seemed to stare directly at him, causing the blood to pulse in his veins. The huge screen crackled again with static and then died, as if the plug had been pulled. Our only warning? What the hell is coming next? So I hope you guys enjoyed the first chapter of Batman Arkham Knight. let me know what you thought in the comments. And if you enjoyed this book, pick up a copy for yourself at your local library or your bookstore. If you have any other recommendations for me, let me know in the comments. And I hope you guys have a good night. Good night.